So, starting Sefer Shemos. I don't know if anybody's been getting the emails. So I mentioned that there's specifically a new direction that we're going to be taking in the Ramban's commentary in particular, but he views that that's the way the entire Torah is going here. And this is his introduction to Shemos, the first part of what we're going to learn. It's something that we actually covered in the first time that we were together in PARSHA Lech Lecha. We mentioned that the theme of the books, of the titles that we give them. It's important to remember that when we call a book Genesis or Exodus, that's not what we typically call them in Hebrew. We call them Bereshis Shemos, based on the first word that they come from. But thematically, they also have names that are unclear where they come from. I was looking into this. I thought that it was coined by Chazal when we did Parshas Lech Lecha. It might have been that the titles actually are derived from the Septuagint, from the Targum Shivim. The rabbis, there's whether or not this is the same thing as a Septuagint, also very complicated. Rabbi Terchiner actually gave a shiur on behalf of the Kollel this past Sunday about this matter. What exactly was the translation that Chazal created for the Torah in Greek? But in any event, what we have now, which is called the Septuagint, which is probably not what they translated. In any event, the titles apparently come from that. But there's more thematic titles to each of the books. So we have Bereshis is called Sefer Yetzirah, the book of creation, and Shemot, and that's what we call Genesis. We translate it as. We have Shemos is known as Sefer HaGeula, the book of redemption, which is we translate the title of the book is called Exodus, right? So thinking about that title, we could be struck with why it has that title. Like we mentioned earlier, the same thing with Bereshis, with regards to Genesis. The creation story is the very beginning of the book. It's not the entire book. With Bereshis, it's not even the entire first PARSHA. Whereas, and you could ask similarly, not as strongly, but here also, the Exodus, the leaving of Egypt, that is not what this book is entirely about. That's where we start. That's what we start talking about. But then we go into we get into Har Sinai. We get into the construction of the Mishkan. There's a lot more going on in Sefer Shemos.
And there's also the enslavement.
And the enslavement. True. That's another good point. So the Ramban, in his introduction, he's going to touch on these issues. He's going to answer our questions. So the Ramban starts. He says, Hishlam HaKatsu Sefer Bereshis, and now we've completed Bereshis. Shehu Sefer HaYetzirah, B'chidush HaOlam. This is the book of creation. It's the renewal, the creation of the world. The Yetzirah's Kol Notzar, and the creation of every being. Uv'mikrei ha'avos shehim ke'inyan Yetzirah l'zaram. And also, as we mentioned many weeks ago, with regards to the occurrences that happened to the avos, to our fathers, that itself was a Yetzirah, it was a creation for their children. Because within what happened to them, the various events that took place in their lives, those alluded to, and the Ramban developed it even further than just allusions, but actually causes in some way, that which would happen to the children of the Bnei Yisrael. As we mentioned, the general klal of Ma'aseh Avos, Siman Levanim, that we have. So that was what was taking place in Bereshis. In Sefer Bereshis, we have not just the creation of the world, but also the creation of, Klal Yisrael's destiny. Okay, so then we mentioned this the last time we learned this piece. The Ramban explains that that's how this addresses the entire theme of that book. Genesis creation is not just the first few prakim in the Sefer, but creation is, so to speak, taking place throughout the first book. But now that we're done with the creation story, so to speak, not just in physical creation, but also in our destiny, Hizkel Sefer Acher, we're beginning the next book. Now we are entering into officially Siman Lebanon mode, the events that will take place, that were alluded to earlier. This book is in reference to the exile that we had, that was actually decreed explicitly, as we remember, in Parshas Lech Lecha. Hashem is promising to Avram that this is going to happen. We are going to go down to Mitzrayim. We're going to be enslaved by another people. So Ramban is again pointing that out. That's another theme the Ramban, he likes to constantly reinforce nevuah. So uvagula mimenu, and that we're also going to be talking about our redemption from it. And that's why, and some people wonder why this is the case. If we're ending the previous sefer talking about the generations of Yaakov, all the 70 people that came down to Egypt, why are we listing off names again at the beginning of this book? Particularly keeping in mind that it's not even the full list. We only give the names of the Shvatim. We don't say all 70 like we did in Bereshis. So he answers, the reason why we did that is Afal Pishak Var Nichtav Zeh. Even though this is already written, Ba'avur Kiridasam Sham Hu Rishis Hagalas. When we are discussing the people that went down, that is a way of describing Galus is beginning here. Ki Me'az Huchal. That's where it started. So this is the Ramban is viewing the Geula, the entire process of Galus to Geula. That's the theme of this work, right? And something that would be interesting is, as we know, that there's really two different points in time where a person would think that the enslavement started. There's the most obvious is when we actually had to start doing backbreaking labor, right? But does anybody know of another approach? There is another, besides what the Ramban is going to say. He's going to say a third. But there is another approach, and I think it's commonly used as Haggadah Torah. We talk about how do we, God promises Abraham we're going to be down there we're going to be in Gullus for 400 years. Right? And if you look at the totals, it comes to 210, not even close. So there's a number of explanations, but one of them, to get to that total, says you don't start from when we were actually enslaved, or even when we went down to Mitzrayim. You start from Yitzchak. He's he was the first person that in some ways lived as a stranger, even in Eretz Yisrael. It was a land that wasn't actually acquired by him yet. So that's somehow how we think of it. There's also a famous comment of the Vilna Gaon, right? He says, if you look at the trup for Vayamaru Eskayehem, that the Egyptians, they made the Jews' lives bitter. The trup, the cancellation symbols, it's Kadma V'Azla. Vayamaru Eskayehem. So those two notes are called the Kadma V'Azla, which actually means get up and go. If you were to translate those actual notes. And the Gra says, if you take the gematria of Kadma V'Azla, it equals 190. It completes the total of the 400. So it's an interesting gematria, but the message of it. Anytime I talk about gematrias, I always have to quote Avram Shor from New York. He always says, don't think the Chazal were just sitting there with calculators and trying to figure out interesting things. They saw a connection in the words, and there was a message there to be taken, and they saw that the gematria confirmed it. So the message there was that our enslavement was so bitter, and it was more bitter than Hashem could have possibly intended during the course of those 400 years. That in some ways the Mitzvah managed to get 400 years of slavery packed into 210, and that's how we were able to leave early. But the Ramban. Back to the Ramban, this is a little bit of a different approach. He's saying the Galus and Geula process, it starts when we actually go down to Egypt.
I thought he said that it begins when they go to bury Yaakov, and they're not allowed to take their families with them. They're prohibited. There's a Ramban that says that that's an indication that they're already subject to the...
There is, he does allude to, he mentions that that's a proof that we were, that at that point we were no longer, our own people.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that shows at the start. I mean, that shows that maybe that was the conditions from the very beginning, perhaps. And that's why Yosef himself also felt that he couldn't, perhaps, go down to get Yaakov himself, to actually bring him to Mitzrayim. But the Ramban's approach is that when we actually went down to begin with, and that's what he says, that's what the Torah is trying to communicate. Galus began at that point. It's not about slavery. It's not about Yitzchak being born. It's about going down to Egypt.
How many years were we actually in Egypt?
210.
No, wasn't that the number of years of slavery? 210.
Oh, sorry, that's a good point.
Before slavery, there was
actual slavery.
Is less than 200.
It's less than 210 then, right? It's what would we say it is roughly? Probably.
People usually mark it from the death of
86.
Joseph.
86 years of slavery.
From Miriam.
We do assume, right, that a significant shift happened. I think according to the Midrash when Miriam was born.
But Joseph lived to 110.
Mm-hmm.
And he was 30 when he stood before Paro. I think
approximately.
Right. So that would mean that he went on to it for another 80 years.
Mm-hmm. And even then, we say things didn't start getting ugly until all the Shvatim died. It's going to be a nice amount less than 210, right? 86. Where'd you get that number from?
I think I once heard it.
Okay. It would make sense, I think, such a number. Anyways, as Ramban says, Galus begins when we actually go down to Mitzrayim. Where are we in the Hebrew text?
Because Moshe Rabbeinu was 80, and his sister, I think, was 6 years older than her. Him.
You say he was 80 when the mission began.
Yeah, when he came back.
It's probably
he was 80.
something like 87 then. That 80 is when Moshe comes down to Mitzrayim.
Yeah.
To start his mission, so we're still there for a little bit longer. Okay, so definitely within that range. So that's good math. Okay.
So Ramban does not hold from the idea of counting from the time of Yitzhak.
To my knowledge, I don't know if there's any point where he makes note of how come this isn't 400 years. I'll be keeping an eye out for it as we go through the parshas. But to my knowledge, I don't think he addresses it.
It's interesting he used the word here, Reshit HaGalut, but the word Galut does not appear in the Brit, in the language of the Brit.
Well, what is used? Not Galus, but they're one and the same, two sides of the same coin, no?
One and the same. And when we talk about
if I'm in Galus, that means I'm a stranger.
I understand that, but that's how one can begin to understand the count beginning from Yitzhak. Abraham refers to himself as a ger.
Right.
He was a ger,
but it couldn't start from him because it was decreed on his children, so he doesn't count, but his son does.
So it begins on his children after his birth, Yitzhak's birth. So it does make sense from the language shot.
So that's the probably the most famous and well-known approach. Anyways, but back to our another issue that the Ramban's going to talk about right now. When did it end? Exactly. And this might help out how the Ramban gets to the total, perhaps. Really not so much, I don't think. But the exile, it ended at the time when Klal Yisrael got back to the level of their fathers. We're not necessarily talking about freedom here. When they left Mitzrayim, even though they had in fact left the house of slavery at that point, they were still in Golus because they were not in their land. They were wandering in the desert for another 40 years. Right, when you have all these events that take place after leaving Egypt, going to Har Sinai, receiving the Torah, building the Mishkan, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu bringing the Shekhinah back to the Mishkan, and then back to Klal Yisrael. That's when they reattain the level of their fathers. This is getting a little bit more, I suppose, mystical. That's when the secret of God went back to their tents. They are the chariot. We say that the avos were the chariot of God. They were, so to speak, the tool by which God, traveled and fulfilled His goal for the world. So Klal Yisrael, they got back to that level at the point of the Mishkan being built. They were able to be the chariot for HaKadosh Baruch Hu as well. Then that's when they were truly redeemed. And that's when we end this book. That's the end of the book. It's when the glory of God goes back to them and is dwelling amongst them. If you look at the next verse, I just quoted the last pasuk of Sefer Shemos. How does the book end? The conclusion is, the grand finale is, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu was with the Jewish people. He was in the Mishkan. He had brought them back to the level they were in previously.
Year and change.
Right. So with regards to the totals, it's not going to help us out.
Near at 400.
Right. I wasn't intending to bring this up to get in the totals. I thought maybe it would help, but it doesn't at all because it's really not so much more time.
That's the point that they reached the level of the tent of Sarah. Basically.
Yeah, and the avos in general.
The miracles of the tent of Sarah have returned to the Mishkan.
Yeah. So what the Ramban is doing now, is similar to when we referred to this introduction, back when we did Parshas Lech Lecha, we talked about Ma'aseh Avosim and Labanim. So how do I understand the entire book of Bereshis being called Genesis? How is it all a book of creation? So we said beyond the first couple of prakim, it's also Ma'aseh Avosim and Labanim, the creation of the destiny of the Jewish people. And now the Ramban is essentially doing the same kind of tactic in understanding Sefer Shemos. It's the book of Geula, of redemption, but that doesn't mean, and this is an important theme that we usually tap into as we come towards Pesach, is that our freedom, our physical freedom, our ability to do whatever we wanted when we left Egypt, that's not what a Jew typically views as freedom. That's not what we view as the highest level. It's what we do with it afterwards. It's the taking action in a way by which Kadosh Baruch Hu is with us and living a more refined existence. That's true Geula. So the Ramban is saying that's the theme of this entire book, that we go from Galus in Egypt to Hashem bringing His Shekhinah back to them through the Mishkan. That's basically the theme. That's how we understand the theme of the book. That's how we understand how it can all be called Exodus, all be called Sefer HaGeula. So I just wanted to go into that before we went into anything specifically in this parsha. It's a very important thing to know about the entire book. So then I want, yeah.
And also, I heard someone say that, Rabbi, that the 40 years in the desert is actually a microcosm of what happens to the Jews in the future until we reach Mashiach.
Interesting.
That's 40 years.
He says the Jews in the desert were their own Maisavos,
right,
so to speak.
Right. That itself, until we reach go to Israel, which is like the time of Mashiach, that's the 40 years.
Very good. This is layers and layers of Maisavos, and some of the bottom like a chain reaction taking place. So anyway, we're about to talk about Goldschmiedt time. Does anyone remember what we said was the Maisa Avos for the Simon Lebanon of going down to Egypt? Do you remember what did the Ramban say earlier?
He said because Abraham went down to Egypt,
right.
It was a famine. Therefore, he caused his descendants to also be able to also go down to Egypt.
The Ramban was critical of the fact that Abraham went.
Yes.
Some disagree with the Ramban, but the Ramban makes a number of parallels. He says if you look at that whole story, Abraham goes down. They take his wife. He ends up. I think there's more parallels that I'm not thinking of off the top of my head, but Paro essentially kicks him out, leaving him with great wealth. At the same time, the Ramban says all those things essentially took place. That the Mitzrim, the Egyptians, they tried to. Also, there's the idea that we went down for a famine, by the way, but that Paro, when he made his decree to drown all the Jewish boys, the Ramban points out the reason why it wasn't the girls as well is because they wanted to use the Jewish girls in the way that they had perversely thought that they could. So that's similar to what Paro did with regards to, or what Paro attempted to do with Sarah, and in the Geula and being kicked out with a tremendous amount of wealth. There's a lot of parallels there, which would seem to indicate to the Ramban very strongly that this is the Simon Lebanon.
That the deed to Goshen went with Sarah.
Went to who?
Went with Sarah.
Oh, interesting.
So that when they came back,
they had the rights to
They weren't actually in Egypt. They were in Goshen, which was deeded to Sarah.
Wow, they had ownership of it for those hundreds of years. Yeah. Interesting. So the next source, we're not going to do it inside. We might refer back to it, but it's the Psukim. It's the Psukim that take place in the beginning of the story. Right? I skipped the listing of the generations of Klal Yisrael. We already talked about what function that serves. But something that comes out, something that always bothered me when I was looking at these parshios or specifically this section, is how did this happen? How did we get to this stage where all of a sudden we were avadim? We were of the highest class. We were very well respected in Egypt at the end of Parshas Bereshis, at the end of Sefer Bereshis, sorry. And all of a sudden, in a matter of how many psukim? 14 psukim, we're the lowest of the low. How on earth did that take place? And if you look at the psukim just at a glance, it doesn't seem like the Torah is doing a very good job of explaining. It might be more that setting the stage of how we're actually progressing in the story, more than just giving us background, which it doesn't seem to be doing a good job of. It's actually it's here to teach us a lesson. It didn't just say and the Jews became slaves somehow, but at the same time it didn't say it in a more elaborate way, perhaps because it's really just giving us the Rashi Prakim, the overarching principles of a lesson to be taught to us. I have heard that this is, and we have to keep in mind, this is the first incident of anti-Semitism in Jewish history, and in many ways we talked about the first of things being very definitional. They give you a good idea of what to look into and how to see patterns as things continue. So in many ways this will teach us lessons as to how anti-Semitism works, how the Jewish people managed to get taken advantage of. So I thought we would go in that direction, particularly because Ramban, I believe, he's the first one that actually takes the Midrashay Chazal in his commentary and starts talking and elaborating on the Psukim and saying how this actually could have taken place. It's a very important idea. Okay, so what we know certainly from the beginning is that Paro's intention is to kill the Jewish people. Right? It's not just he doesn't do slave labor because he needs pyramids built or whatever it is that he has created. I think it's a misconception that we built the pyramids. I don't know much about it, but I don't think we actually did. But in any event, it wasn't just to serve Paro's financial needs. It was to kill us. This was part of a process that eventually led to Jewish babies being thrown into the river. So why did it take place in the way that it did? In some ways, I used to think that maybe just the way this came about, that you had the will of the Egyptian people, and that's a function of, we shouldn't necessarily impose our society, today's values on society back then. It could very well be that everybody would have been fine with the idea of wiping out an entire nation and not saying, not having a problem with that at all. That's what I used to think, and the Ramban says absolutely not. There had to be a step-by-step process here. Paro knew that, and that's how he managed to get things going, because had he done everything immediately, it just said throw all Jewish babies into the river, nobody would have gone along with it. There was a sense of morality.
How do you conclude that from the beginning he wanted to kill them? He was using them as a workforce.
He was using them, right? But if we let's say if we look at the beginning, Paro's problem, his Jewish problem here, he's talking to his advisors, and he says, "What's going to happen?" If you look in Pasuk Yud, right? Hava nischak malo. Let's get wise concerning them. Pen yirba v'haya ki tekrana milchama v'nosaf gam hu al soninu v'nilcham banu v'alam in haaretz. Because what might happen? Sorry, I'm out of source sheets. Welcome. What might happen is we're going to have our enemies come, and I think some Mefarshim actually explain who would go to war with Egypt. All the people that owe the Egyptians, all the people that gave the Egyptians money over previous years to buy food. Then in some ways they might feel that was some sort of extortion, that they might come back for it. All of the world's wealth was in Egypt right now. So Egypt certainly had enemies at that point. And the Mitzvah, or Paro at least, was concerned that perhaps the Jewish people would join forces with the enemy and defeat the Egyptians. And what they would do then, there's different explanations of how you go with how you understand the end of that pasuk. But either they will leave and continue to support our economy, or they'll kick us out. There's fear coming from a sense of physical existence. This isn't let's deal wisely with them and make a quick buck. This is let's deal wisely with them because we're worried about their existence and they're a threat to the crown. They're a threat to us, right? So this is a matter of not just profit, but about trying to actually wipe them out.
No, I think it's about making sure that we keep them successfully enslaved. That they are dangerous. And Egypt had civil wars. It had wars going on. Mm-hmm. So he had, one of the arguments is that there were two kinds of rulers of Egypt. One was a Semitic ruler, which was Hittite, mm-hmm. and the other was Theban, Egyptians, right? And that some say that this Pharaoh was a change. But even if that isn't the argument, that Egypt had enemies and that it feared a slave rebellion, that it was so numerous.
But then how did the steps they took work to resolve that?
Initially? Well, initially...
You want to say the goal changed over time.
Yeah, the steps they took were not initially to kill them. Mm-hmm. It was to solidify the enslavement and to hopefully reduce the growth rate of the population.
One could say that this is a process that's evolving motives as we're going through the whole process. Yeah. That's a possibility. The Ramban is going to say a little differently. He's going to say...
what's happened is that the Jews have lost their protection of Joseph, mm-hmm. which they had up until this point. That's a big change, really.
For sure. Now they're unprotected.
That's true.
Mm-hmm.
Can you comment on why it's Havani Khatman Lo?
Referring to it. I think actually art school, if you look, they translated it as it. It shouldn't be. Let's deal wisely with them. Right. There's singular used throughout this discussion, and there's different drushes. We're going to go through a few of them. But with regards to that sentence, I don't have anything here. But I think the Chazal understood it in the Gemara and Sota, and also in the Medrash Rabbah. They say that Lo is referring to God. Let's deal wisely with God, Him. And the intention is, if the Medrash elaborates, it says that Paro in some ways valued the God of the Hebrews. He was afraid of the Jewish God. but at the same time he felt that in some way he could outsmart him. There's the discussion of, well, God doesn't, he always punishes Mida Keneged Mida, so if we drown the baby boys, he can't punish us back through water because he promised he would make a mabul. There's a lot of joshos that come out of this, but the way they work off of that word of lo is referring to God as opposed to the Jewish people.
And Allah refers also to the same thing.
The Allah is more difficult.
Only if you take that track out, the law.
Even if you don't, Allah min haaretz, and they'll leave the land.
The nation.
The nation will leave the land.
He is the Ramban's understanding of the progressive attack on them. And what is telling us here in the Pasuk is at this beginning point they were a nation. They were as one. They were unified. Yisrael. And so the attack has to be to defeat them. It's a moral defeat. It's an intellectual. It's a personal defeat. And that's why the next two can talk about how they were defeated. And once you break them apart, give them such the work that they had to do. They lose their sense of unity as a nation, but that was what the attack was about, which is true. That's Ramban.
I heard an interesting word. The last step at the end of this week's parsha, when Moshe actually starts trying to get something done, that one of the punishments that Paro had for the Jews is now you all have to get your own straw. Right, so we assume that's pretty bad because you actually have to get your own, more of your own resources to build everything with it. It requires a lot more work. I forgot who I heard in the name of, but that there was another motive there as well. This is meant to hack away at the achdus of Klal Yisrael, because if you imagine, if straw was being provided by Paro, that means essentially every morning people would gather together. They'd all be in, the supply channel. And they would meet. They would get they'd get to see each other, and have some sense of friendship and camaraderie. When everybody has to search for their own goods, that everybody's on their own at this point. They're competing against each other. They don't get to meet with each other in the morning every day. I thought that was interesting also, that there's an idea of attacking the unity of the Jewish people as well. But let's go with the Ramban. How he describes this whole process. So he starts. I'm quoting in bits and pieces. I don't know why the Ramban does things the way he does in this parsha. For these next few psukim, he talks about the process in a little bit of a out of order kind of form. So on the source sheet, it's not how it appears in the Chumash itself. I took different paragraphs and I reordered things so we can actually go through the story kaseder. So the Ramban says, "Havan iskak malo." When Paro says, "Let's deal wisely with them," Lo ra Paro v'chachmei yoatzo lahakosam b'cherev. Paro understood, as well as his advisors, that they couldn't just strike them by the sword immediately. Ki tiyeh begida gedola lahakos chinam. It would be a tremendous betrayal to just strike them for no at least good reason in the eyes of the people. Especially considering the fact that these people were people that were told to come into the nation, to come into the land of Mitzrayim by the Paro that ruled before this one. Ramban apparently is assuming that we're dealing with a different Paro at this point, but it's even more of a betrayal that the people you invited to come to just go and all of a sudden kill them like that. And certainly, besides the advisors, the nation would not allow such violence to take place. And Paro certainly did consult them. And also for the fact that Klal Yisrael at that point, as we know, is a very strong and powerful nation. There would be a lot of war. There'd be a civil war. There seems to be a little bit of a machlokas in the Rishonim as to what extent our population compared to the rest of the Egyptian people. I saw in the Malbim that he assumes that all of these claims that Paro says, they're all false. They're all just pretexts because for some reason he has another agenda. But I think the Netziv, he points out that he believes that the population actually was getting dangerously close to outnumbering the Egyptian people of the Jews.
That was only free getting welfare and education credit.
Interesting.
It's on paper.
So the Netziv thinks that this might have actually been a legitimate fear in some way. Not legitimate in the sense of that you could have reasonably suspected that the Jewish people would have rebelled, but perhaps with regards to the numbers, that at least has some validity. But anyways, further in the Ramban. So he said, let's do things wisely here. That way the Jewish people don't understand. They don't pick up on the fact that we're doing this out of hatred for them. So what he did was, he made them, he placed a tax on them. The way of the world at that time is that foreigners they paid extra tax. You had that by Shlomo HaMelech also. The Gerim, the Gerei, not Gerei Tzedek, but Gerei Toshavim that lived in Eretz Yisrael at that time, Shlomo taxed them further. He gave them special jobs. So Paro did that here also. Ramban goes from that first step. He goes now to the final part of the process that somehow progresses into Paro telling the women that helped give the Jewish women give birth to kill children. And this was meant to be done in a way that even the mothers themselves of these children would have no idea what's going on. Right? If you the Midrashim I think explain that Paro was, when he advises Shifra and Pua to kill the babies, it had to be done in a hush-hush manner. It had to be done in a way that it looked like a stillbirth. That there's a secrecy here, and the reason why the Ramban says is, and this is something that we have to keep in mind. There was a sense of morality, there was a sense of civility in the world at this point. We can't just assume that everybody was bloodthirsty and couldn't wait to kill the Jews. Paro understood that, and he realized that there had to be a slow process by which, first of all, the Jewish people wouldn't realize what was going on, and that even the Egyptian nation as well wouldn't. That they would go along with this slowly but surely. Right? There's a preparation for the victims as well as for the aggressors. I was scanning. If you look, has anybody ever heard of the book Let My Nation Go, Let My People Go? I forgot what it's called. It's put out by Feldheim. It's a very interesting book. It's like in a novel form, the story of the Exodus, but framed in a way that it really makes a tremendous use of the Midrashim and sources it. It's like a novel with sources. It's interesting how he puts the Midrashim together sometimes, but it's a very excellent way to, get a fuller picture of what's going on. And so many of his notes refer to these Rambans that we're going to be reading, where the Ramban is the first one to really set the stage in an orderly manner of what's happening here. But in that book, I noticed that he quotes a number of Rishonim and perspectives as to what exactly Paro's advisors would have claimed. What was their propaganda exactly? So on the one hand, there's the Balaturim. We mentioned this already a little bit, that we don't owe any gratitude to Yosef's family, they claimed. Even though Yosef was the one that allowed us to thrive in a time of famine, nevertheless, because of him, all the other nations of the world, we managed to extort money from them, and everybody hates us now. So that was one claim by Paro's advisors. None of these are good tainas. None of these are good claims, but these are suggestions that are given as to what they were thinking. Another perspective by the Sefer HaYashar, he says that the advisors to Paro said if Shimon and Levi were able to destroy an entire city, Shechem, as we learned earlier, so you can imagine what an entire nation could do. That there was a fear of, even if they were a minority among the Egyptian population as a whole, that they could create tremendous damage. And then the Or HaChaim explains, and this is, I think, what we traditionally assume, that there was certain kind of fear of another group of people that kept themselves very separate as a nation. The famous Midrashim that talk about the fact that we kept our own. There was no Torah yet at this point, but we kept a certain cultural identity and a certain exclusivity to ourselves. That we had our own, clothing, language. We married within. We didn't marry without names, right? So all of those are
buying wholesale.
I don't understand. So
we never bought retail again.
Okay. Not good for the economy. People that buy retail. So all of those are, I think, what we typically assume is where this xenophobia is coming from. This is coming from the fact that these are people that keep themselves separate. If they're not assimilating, then there is a fear that that they have dual loyalties, that they're perhaps going to turn against us. So the Ramban, he continues, he discusses. So the first step, if you look in the Psukim, is Sari Misim, that translated as taskmasters were placed upon them. So the Ramban says, Sam al ha'am mas. He enforced, he required the Jewish nation, to pay tribute. That people would be taken to serve the king. He appointed Egyptians to watch over them, and that there were people that would be taking shifts in doing various tasks for the king. They would be there for a month or perhaps more, building different structures of the king. And then the other days, I guess, when some of them had off, they would be home. These taskmasters, they commanded Paro to they commanded the Jewish people to make these buildings for Paro. Even ha'am arei miskanos Paro b'masa zeh. And their way of paying tribute was to make these storage cities. When they saw this wasn't working, apparently
so it began as a labor tax.
Right, and each stage apparently was meant to achieve the goal in its own right. It wasn't. In some ways, it was part of a process, but the Ramban is also saying that each part had its own goal, and it frustrated the Egyptians that it wasn't fulfilling that goal. The Ramban doesn't elaborate, but if you have people that are away from home for many, many months, that could very easily lead to a lack of children. When people aren't home, they're not home with their wives, they're not able to, continue to propagate. The people, they were disgusted by the fact that the Jewish people still managed to be growing at a significant rate. So that's when they started enslaving the people. That progressed to a stage where Paro said, not only are you making storage cities for me, but now it's a rule that any mitzvah, if he wants, he can tell a Jew to, go wash my floors, go, do any kind of menial task in his household. And that's what the pasuk is trying to communicate when it talks about making them serve very hard labor. But even then, the Ramban doesn't really address, I think, what's a crucial question. How did the Jews actually get themselves into this? How did they not see it coming? Some of them did. If you look in the Midrash from Shemot Levi, they said they weren't subject to this for a certain reason. What did they do differently than the rest of the Jewish people, and what were the Jewish people thinking that they allowed themselves to come to this state without protesting it, without seeing where this was going? So the Ramban doesn't quote this, but there's a Midrash that I have in the next source. It's the Midrash Rabbi. Vayasimu alav says aleim lo nemar ela alav. So here we're making note again of the singular being used, that they, the Mitzrim, placed on him the Sari Misim, this service, which we understand as taskmasters. The Midrash won't do that. But anyways, the implied question is, like what you were asking, what does it mean alav? Why are we using singular? It should be aleihem. It should be on the Jewish people. Aleihem lo nemar ela alav. It's talking about it should be plural, not singular. Tamid devei Rabbi Elazar bar Shimon. Rabbi Elazar says, "Malamid sheviu malabin v'talu b'tzavaro shel Paro." You see from this that they hung an actual a brickmaker's mold, has like a necklace, on Paro himself. If a single Jew that was involved in these tasks of building storage cities for Paro was to say, I'm a finicky guy, I'm very sensitive, I can't handle this work, they would say to him, are you more of a refined person than Paro himself? Right? So certainly you have to do this work. And then they whipped him and made him get back to work. Sari Misim, what does Sari Misim here mean according to the Medrash? Davar Shemisim alav levinim. It's the thing that you placed on the bricks. It was a bricklayer's mold. They don't understand that as taskmasters, tax collectors. It's a necklace of some sort. Laman anosa b'sivlosam, and this was to afflict them in their sufferings. Laman anos paro b'sivlosam shel Yisrael. Again, we're using the singular. What was it? It was an affliction of Paro. Obviously not an affliction in the sense that he was working day and night, but that there was some kind of campaign here of showing that Paro was behind them in this. Various elaborations of this Midrash exist. There was it's almost posed to Klal Yisrael as saying, be a part of this nation. You don't keep yourself separate. The population is growing significantly. We have to build more cities. Be a part of this, and to so to speak boost morale. Paro himself got involved in the work, and that was a motivating force that managed to make the people think that this wasn't just a trap for them. The Mitzvim were involved as well. They also realized that we should be doing this. This is a great effort, and everybody was starting to work together at one point. And the way the Midrashim elaborate this is that eventually those Egyptians that were involved in the process became the taskmasters over the Jews, and the Jewish people they don't even know what hit them. But originally it was meant to it was not voluntary, like we said. The Ramban thinks that this was something that they were forced into, but it's something where you don't necessarily see it coming. You see how this could have actually been viewed as like an important national project that they eventually managed to find themselves trapped in.
What that Midrash? Where do they get? Do they hang the story of the Paro's necklace on any particular phrase?
So the alav, the singular, they make it work with they say the singular doesn't work here because we're referring to a nation, not one person. So the Medrash takes in the direction of saying, it was only on one person. That if you interpret Sari Misim as referring to a bricklayer's mold, so then that was placed on one person, on Paro, and that's meant to reflect this this general idea that a Paro got involved to trick them into doing this. So that's one perspective that the Midrash takes that maybe helps us understand how the Jews got into this mess.
There had to be an element of willingness because not all the Jews bought into it. Shevet Levi didn't.
Right, so what happened with Shevet Levi, they maybe perhaps had a little bit more foresight in this whole matter. There is also discussion.
There's something else about that too. Yosef, when he was selling, go ahead about
there is an Midrash that talks about, if you look in the Psukim themselves in Bereshis, Yosef himself instituted, and it's curious as to why he does this, but it ended up working out for the better for us.
Because he wanted the Shevet Levi to be the
describe
story of the Torah, so there would be at least a kernel of it, and that could teach eventually when they got out somebody who knew the Torah.
For people that don't know the workings of what's going on here, Yosef, if you see when he's storing up the grain for the Egyptians, the people come to Yosef. Eventually, their funds are depleted. And they say, well, what can we do now to get food? So he says, so you'll start working for me. Oh, you'll give me your land, etc. It's a process by which the people find themselves more and more subject to the whims of, the Egyptian government. But the Psukim note that Yosef never applied any kind of tax or any kind of penalty or, pressure to the priests, the Egyptian priests, the Avodah Zarah priests. Why Yosef did that perhaps can be explained in light of this. How did Levi get out of this whole mess? They had a certain clergy privilege that the other Shvatim didn't.
He set the precedent that the priests would not have to be subject to the same things. The Jews, their priests would not at the same time.
It seems that their priests also chose not to have him murdered, but to have him in prison. That they were the judges in the affair with Potiphar.
So I didn't follow.
When he was accused of rape, Potiphar's wife, right? It was the priests who realized where the tear in the fabric was, right? And so that he was imprisoned and not murdered for it.
Oh, interesting. I mean, he has a certain sense of gratitude.
Yeah.
To the priests.
To the judges who were the priests.
They helped them out at one point.
And it also says that the priests had a stipend, so they were never in a situation where the rest.
Right. The reason they were able to get out of this is because they never sold their land. They never.
Because they always had a stipend. Before Joseph got there, they had it.
Yeah. Absolutely. So I think we're going to have to start doing things outside here because we're short on time. So the next Midrash, what does it say? It talks. This is also well known in the Haggadah Torah that there was a certain how were their lives made even more bitter. That if you look in the Psukim, this is actually a progression going on. That each and every phrase means something else happened. And the Haggadah takes it in that direction as well, that the different genders were forced to do the jobs that were strange to them. A man would have to do what we would call woman's work, and a woman would have to do man's work, let's say lifting heavy things, etc. And that itself was meant to be demoralizing. But there's a progression here of what Paro is doing, and that's what the Ramban and the Midrashim are trying to indicate. Just in the next source, what does he talk about? He talks about how then the work gets much more intense as we progress. It wasn't just simply making cities, but eventually turns into the idea of having to provide not destroy it. That comes at the end of the parsha, but they had to involve themselves in more of the processing than they had to do in the past. And they were starting to get beaten and really and being cursed at any time that they didn't do what they were supposed to. But the Ramban is basically discussing how things come slowly but surely. Then the next entry in the Ramban, he starts talking about finally getting to the point of murder, of infanticide. That what's going on there, the Ramban explained, even at that point, Paro understands he can't get away with open murder. He can't even at this point command people to throw babies into the river. He starts by trying to work as an insider. He starts trying to talk to the midwives and seeing if they would be complicit with him in this plan. I think you'd have to assume that if Paro thinks that this can happen, I think that lends more credence to the idea that Shifra and Pua are not, in fact, Jews. It'd be very hard to justify and say that, Jewish people would have entertained the notion of murdering people, unless you say that the pressure from Paro was that severe that it could have actually been an option. But what Paro was doing was, the Ramban elaborates, it was kill these babies in secret. Don't let it be known. Make it look like a stillborn. Make it look like this is totally an accident. And Paro's plan was the Jewish people will slowly but surely not be able to continue to develop, and their population won't be able to grow. As we know, Shifra and Pua refused to do that. And then what happens after that? The Ramban explains when you get to the point where it's a statement of throw the Jewish babies into the river. right? That itself also was not done in a way that that was a direct command. If you look, do we have it in which section of the Ramban is it in? Yes. If you look at the end of this paragraph, it starts with a yud in parentheses. This is commentary to Pasuk Yud. It's the last sentence there. Akasher Putra, actually even before that. No, I'll just say it outside. You had people that essentially Paro was giving not permission, but he was saying, if a Jewish baby was thrown into the river by somebody, it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. He made it sound like he made it show that he was complicit, but not actually directly commanding people to do this. That it was essentially showing his approval. The Ramban talks about how if a person had actually gone into a Jewish house, taken a baby, and thrown him into the river, so that's a gross violation of law. But at the same time, there was Paro made it so that the government would be unresponsive. There'd be so much red tape in trying to actually get something done, to actually bring this person to justice, that nothing would ever come out of it. There'd be bureaucratic red tape, everything. That the person, we would tell them, produce witnesses. Show me. We know in Jewish law how hard it is to find witnesses that really meet all the requirements for certain violations. So even more so, perhaps with Paro, he said, show me witnesses that saw this guy throw a baby into the river, and makes all sorts of requirements to actually convict the person so difficult that the Jews wouldn't be able to do anything about this. And Paro himself, also not taking this seriously in a general way, is essentially he's approving passively of a pogrom. That was his plan. He would say that, it's not me. I'm not commanding the Jewish, anybody to throw Jewish babies into the river. If it's happening, that's the will of the people. I don't approve of it, of course, but that's what's happening. That's the direction that the Ramban takes, how things start. Eventually, we know it gets even more severe. The Ramban also notes that he thinks that, in his opinion, this gezerah that the baby should be thrown into the river, it was short-lived. It didn't last for long. He says, if Aaron was born, there doesn't seem to be any brouhaha surrounding his birth. Mm-hmm. There doesn't seem to be any issues there.
But wasn't Aaron older?
Right, exactly.
Moshe, so then
but Aaron's only 3 years older, so he says this was not a gezerah that was taking place for a long period of time. It happened shortly before Moshe was born, and the Ramban talks about it. It seems like it stopped. I'm not sure why he thinks for sure that this gezerah stopped over time. He gives many rationales as to why that could have happened. He says maybe Basia, when she takes this Jewish baby in, knowing who he is, she begs her father to have mercy, and eventually he decides to. That's one possibility. There's a Midrash that takes in another direction, that the astrologers, they said they knew that the savior of the Jewish people, his demise will be through water. They didn't realize that they were talking about Mei Meriva, Moshe hitting the rock, right? But what Paro thought was, that means we have to drown a baby in the river. And eventually, when Moshe got put into the basket and floating down the Nile, the astrologers came and said, we just saw in the stars and whatever system we use, we saw that the Jewish Savior has been put into the water, no more gezerah. So that was one reason that perhaps it may have stopped. I think he gives a third reason also.
If part of the purpose was to kill the Savior of the Jewish people, right? That opportunity had passed at that point.
Basically, the astrologers told her, mission accomplished. But
whatever it was, he was already born at that point. It was done. You couldn't. There was no sense killing babies the next day because it wouldn't be the Savior.
He was 3 months old when he was in the table.
Right. So 3 months minus whenever it started, but shortly before Moshe's birth, after Aaron's birth. Right, so it really doesn't amount to so much time, but and then I think the third reason, I think this is what fits with the Ramban's approach the most, is what may have possibly made Paro stop. Word got around that he was actually telling people to do this, that he was in some ways working the system in a way that he wouldn't get blamed for it, but that he was behind all of this. And that's when he realized it would have been a PR fiasco that he stopped commanding it, but eventually, he created the monster and it just kept going on its own.
And again, it wasn't working.
Right. The Torah keeps on saying, despite all of Paro's plans, things didn't get fulfilled. Yeah. But anyways, this is all, I guess, a lesson. The way the Ramban understands how things are happening, slowly but surely, taking place. That this is how things happen in the world. People, in some ways, they're moral enough that they're not going to do horrible things to Jews right away, but it'll be a process of propaganda. These Jews are a threat to us. They're going to join another nation in war. It comes with starting to perhaps unfair treatment to them, which eventually leads to degrading treatment, and it enters into the consciousness of the Egyptian people that that it's okay for an Egyptian all of a sudden to go to a Jew's house and tell him start doing service for him, and it becomes okay to the Jews as well. If you look at the end of the parsha, you have Moshe Rabbeinu trying to intercede for the Jewish people, and Paro has a response just making the work worse, right? And the Ramban understands in this last paragraph. He says, the Jewish people were yelling at Moshe. They said, "Stop! He's got all these fake reasons. You want to give him a real reason to start harming us, or start really thinking that we're going to start some kind of rebellion, that we're going to leave? Hush, hush. Let's keep things as untroublesome as possible." But you see that Paro got into their minds, that he was able to make them think that way, that they had victimized themselves in a way that they didn't want to make things worse. Not him. That Moshe was the enemy and not Paro, precisely. That's a pattern that the Jewish people unfortunately go through, and in many forms is taking place today. But that's what I wanted to cover. I think it's a very the Ramban, I think, is a pioneer in his commentary to actually using these midrashim and describing the background information, taking the small amount of psukim and expanding it and showing what exactly this is meant to teach us, and patterns of perhaps anti-Semitism and more.
Decades ago, Rabbi Stauber of Rabbi Gold, Beit Torah, gave Rambam as parallel to Europe in the 20th century.
There's
showed
I can imagine you could do tons with that. There's a pattern for sure.
The Jews always want to be the foremost citizens, so they're the most easily involved in civic projects.
Right.
So first they give their money and they give their sweat.
They're the first ones that come onto this project that Power lends his support to, right?
Right.
And then,
the ideal model citizens.
I think we mentioned this, is that anybody who grew up in the Soviet Union remembers this very famous picture of Lenin, that once a month Lenin would work with the people, and the people would work for free on that day. It was called Black Sabbath, actually, interestingly enough.
That's where the band name comes from.
But the idea was that Lenin was at the front of this huge log, and there was just a regular worker on the back, and he was like Paro, in a sense.
Showing that I'm with you on this.
I'm with you, and just
the next day he goes back to his palace.
Do this for me and for Mother Russia. Right? And people pitched in, and it worked. And he had a very good source from which he learned.
So it's a pattern. It's something that recurs, and that's the lesson of these psukim. That if you look at them and you look at them in the lens that the Ramban does, that Chazal did, we see how things develop. We see, and that's what Kadosh Baruch wants to teach us. That maybe we'll take next time these kinds of things happen, the approach of Shevet Levi, or we'll be smarter about things in general.
Amen.